नमस्ते गुरु जी। जय गुरु जी महाराज।
ये गुरु जी।
जय गुरु जी साध संगत जी। शुक्राना गुरु जी महाराज द मल्टीलिंगुअल सेवादार टीम आप सबका स्वागत करती है। आज गुरु जी की प्लस संगत पुष्पल दास अंकल जी एक बार फिर जूम प्लेटफॉर्म पे संगत शेयरिंग के लिए आए हैं। मैं सेशन को इनिशिएट करने के लिए रूपा सूद आंटी जी से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा, प्लीज सेशन को इनिशिएट करें। ओवर टू यू रूपा आंटी। जय गुरु जी।
जय गुरु जी अंकल जी। नमस्ते गुरु जी। जय गुरु जी प्यारी संगत जी। Thank you Multilingual team and Vasan uncle for creating this platform where all the Sangat come and share their experiences. Today we welcome Pushpal uncle to share his journey and blessings on this platform given by Guruji. Pushpal uncle, you are welcome to please come and share your blessings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes uncle.
Okay. So I'll start quickly because last time I was here, I overshot the time and yet didn't finish off what I had, everything that I planned to cover. So hopefully this time it gets a bit better. Just give me 1 minute. Yeah, hopefully the lighting is better now.
जय गुरु जी अंकल।
So yeah, so you can hear me properly, right?
जय गुरु जी महाराज। जय गुरु जी अंकल।
Okay. Thank you. जय गुरु जी। जय गुरु जी।
अंकल हिंदी इंग्लिश, अंकल हिंदी इंग्लिश मिक्स चलेगा?
हिंदी मिक्स करूंगा तो थोड़ा मतलब मेरा हिंदी वैसे अच्छा नहीं है उतना, तो शायद थोड़ा फ्लो उतना अच्छा नहीं रहेगा. So if there is anything specific, तो please feel free to stop me. Otherwise मैं इंग्लिश में चालू रखता हूँ. ठीक है. So my first visit to Guruji dates back to 2001 July. I was born and brought up in Calcutta. Never really been outside Calcutta except on holidays. And then I moved to Delhi to join Siemens Information Systems Limited, which was based at Gurgaon. And that was my first visit to any city other than Calcutta with the purpose of a long-term commitment. Although I say that, I accepted the job offer because I was told that I was being deputed to the UK within the first few weeks or something like that. But that didn't happen. In fact, 9 months down the line, I was still in Delhi. Although I was enjoying life in Delhi, but there were a host of problems. Then financially, I was a bit strapped because Delhi is 3 times more expensive than Kolkata, at least back in the day it was. And because I was told that I'd be moving to UK shortly, I didn't plan it out financially as well. I probably should have. Then my wife was not keeping well. She had a miscarriage. And she was showing symptoms which, if they didn't subside, we were told by the doctor that she would be needing surgical intervention. So from various possible angles, life was being a bit tough. But luckily, my colleague then, Kalan Chatterjee, who was very close to me and one of Guruji's oldest Sangatis, he talked to me about Guruji, and we decided to visit Guruji once back at the Empire Estate. It was back in 2001. So our first visit, we found out that Guruji wasn't there. He had left for Jalandhar. We were a bit disappointed. But we went back then next month. And that's the day when our lives started changing. Now, back in the day, everyone didn't used to stay back for longer. So people used to be around until Guruji distributed the prasad, the Kara Prasad. So Chai Prasad, Kara Prasad. And then most of the people would leave, except the ones that Guruji would request to stay back. Guruji would order to stay back, rather. And we were told that there have been people who were going there for months, and they were never ordered to stay back, and they were still waiting for their first opportunity to stay back for longer. But Kalan Chatterjee told us that pray hard, and probably, who knows, he might order you to stay back. So we did that, and it actually happened on the first day. So he spoke to us, asked us where we came from, and ordered us to stay back. So on the very first day, we were fortunate enough to have langar at Guruji's. And then when we went back home, we felt an unprecedented bliss. Like everything had calmed down, everything, though things were so turbulent all around, seemed to have calmed down suddenly. And my wife's symptoms got remedied. She didn't have to go for the surgery. And within the next few months, I got my long-awaited deputation to the UK, which is what I was recruited for. That came about in a slightly different way, which I'm going to sort of come to very shortly. And then there were medical problems, like my wife had a history of blood pressure, which wouldn't go away. So she tried different medications and that didn't help. I mean, once she would be off medication, and obviously at that age, you don't want to be hooked onto medication, for something like blood pressure, because that could become a lifelong thing. So, but one day, Guruji decided to sort of crack some jokes with us. So when we visited him one of these days, one of the weekends, he just joked about how my wife and I were wearing matching colors. Coincidentally, we were both wearing green. It wasn't planned. It just happened that way, pure coincidence. But Guruji picked on that and said how we were both wearing green, how it matched colors, and also said that, asked me how I managed to get the Kuri from Chandigarh to marry me. Although neither my wife nor myself had ever been to Chandigarh, but he joked about that. And obviously we couldn't understand what he was saying, because he was, we just about followed Punjabi. We were only a few months in Delhi prior to that, just about starting to follow Punjabi. But Guruji spoke very fast and probably with a certain dialect, which we couldn't follow. And Mrs. Maneka Gandhi was sitting right next to him, and he wanted to translate, but Guruji asked him not to for some reason. So we kept wondering throughout the evening what Guruji had actually told us, but we could understand that others were laughing, so it was probably some kind of a joke. And until Singla uncle told us what he actually said, we were very happy. And the very fact that Guruji could joke with us, it seemed like a blessing in itself. And on that day, when my wife measured her blood pressure for the first time, it came out to be a perfect 80/120. And very soon she was able to get off the medication. And she was off medication until after many years. During pregnancy, it flared up. But even if it did flare up during her pregnancy, it wasn't that bad, as in it didn't lead to any other condition like preeclampsia, or it didn't interfere with the fetal growth or anything like that. So this is how Guruji cured her of high blood pressure. But it came back with age though. But at that point, she was cured, which was a big thing. Then back to the overseas assignment. So Guruji gave me a couple of trips to the UK, because that's so desired back in the day. It's slightly different from today. Every IT professional wanted to go to the US or the UK, and I thought that I was close to getting an opportunity, but at the last moment, something or the other would happen, and they wouldn't come about. But Guruji gave me a couple of quick trips just to give me the taste for it. One of them was a major success. That even made my appetite grow even more for the next one. But then World Trade Center happened, the 9/11 bombings. Everything went into depression. Overseas assignment stopped, and people were lucky to, a lot of people were laid off as well. And those who were not, just thanked their stars that they were not, and that they still had a job. So I thought, that was the end of it. There wouldn't probably be anything in the near future in the way of an overseas assignment. But against everything, Guruji found a way. So I got this assignment at Blackpool, and it was only for 6 months. But I thought, against the tide, against all odds. 6 months is better than nothing. But when we came and joined the client, it seemed like 6 months would become 4 months. That is because they had already done the work, the development work, but they still got us developers there to try and test their work. So they should have really got testers, but they got developers just to be on the safe side, so that if something went wrong, we would have to carry the blame. And if things went right, then that meant they had done the work, not us. So it looked like what seemed to be a 6-month assignment would end in 4 months. And we were all a bit worried, but that didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen, and the reason it didn't end, we kind of knew from before, because earlier when I was waiting for visa and everything, Guruji had sent me a wedding invitation, which was so it was like a royal wedding at Siemens. The CEO of Siemens, as in the top person in Siemens at the time, Mr. Harminder Singh, who was one of the oldest Sangatis. It was her daughter's marriage, and I was one of the junior most employees. I wouldn't have expected definitely an invitation to the royal wedding, but I did end up getting one because Guruji forwarded one to me, as in he sent it across, and he wrote, for some reason, he wrote England in that wedding invitation. And people told me, and then I realized as well with time, that was like my work permit, my visa, my permanent residency, and my citizenship there in that single word, England. And it turned out that way. So even though I came for 6 months and it looked like it was getting over in 4 months, but here I am. It's been 21 years now, and I haven't gone back except on holiday. There were occasions when it seemed like that was it, as in we packed up our bags a couple of times, but for the next assignment, dropping out of nowhere. We kept moving initially place to place, and finally that saw us through 5 years. Got our residency. Then 1 year down the line, got citizenship and kind of settled down here. Even when we wanted to go back, thinking that was better at the point of time, at that point in life, there were a couple of times when we felt like we should go back, and actually tried to come back to India after getting the citizenship and everything. But that didn't happen. So he stopped us. Looking back, we can feel that he stopped us, because that was probably sort of a long-term, in terms of a long-term benefit. It's probably good to stay back rather than go back. We would never find that out, what would have happened if we did go back, but we took it as a direction that he decided for us, that it was probably in our long-term interest to stay back, and so we did. So that's so in terms of overseas assignment, what was seeming to be getting over in 4 months, went on from one assignment to the other, until we ended up in a place called Telford. So it's like a small village. It was project for British Gas that we were doing, and that's when my wife conceived. And then we were a bit nervous because it was such a small village. There was a hospital, the maternity hospital, which was run by midwives rather than consultants. And we knew that my wife, with her history of blood pressure, would be referred to the consultants. So the hospital that was run by consultants was 16 miles. At the time, I didn't drive. I didn't even have a British driving license or a car. So it was 16 miles each way. And it seemed like it was going to get tough, particularly not just the visits from time to time, but also when finally she went into labor, then we had to drive 16 miles. We had to call a taxi or call the ambulance. even though this service is used to be good at the time, but it's not a good prospect, of having to do that when one goes into labor, waiting for the taxi or the ambulance. So we're thinking, how things would turn out. But suddenly, out of the blue, it was decided that that project was going to move to Nottingham, which was a much better city, much bigger city, and much better in terms of medical facilities. So finally, my son was born in the Queen's Medical Hospital, not in Nottingham, which had one of the best maternity units and in England. And the doctor, the consultant who treated my wife, who was responsible, for my wife's childbirth. So she, Dr. Ramsey, so she was a national figure. She has been on television a number of times. We didn't realize at the time. So when the project got moved, we didn't know that it was Guruji's blessings that he wanted my son to be born in one of the best hospitals in the country, under the supervision of one of the best consultants in the country. So we didn't know at the time. At the time, we felt moving, would be such a hassle, packing everything and sort of finding a new home and so on. But in the long term, we realized looking how Guruji's blessing made that possible, and he's the one who chose the direction. We didn't have any role to play in it, and it didn't happen very smoothly, as in because the project was passing through such a turbulent phase that we were not allowed to go and do house hunting in Nottingham. We didn't have the kind of time. It was decided that the client, their project managers would travel to Nottingham looking for houses for us. So we were a big team back then. And we would just have to sign the lease or whatever without really having looked at the house. We would have to trust the client's project managers to do that on our behalf. It didn't seem like a good idea to me because my wife was going to spend the rest of her pregnancy in the house and we had to like it. But the fact that we're not even in a position to see it before taking it didn't sound like a good idea. But so what happened was they looked up quite a few houses, sent us the links, and we just rejected those links, rejected those houses because we didn't like them. So what I did, even before we started sort of planning the move, I just went casually on the internet and looked at houses in Nottingham near Queen's Medical. And the first house that came up, I just looked at it. I didn't even look at the second house, I think. We just looked at it. We liked it from the photos and everything. We had no idea what kind of locality it was. We just saw that it was close to Queen's Medical and that's it. Then when we rejected all the links forwarded to us by the project manager from our client side, we just asked him, can you please look at this link that I'm sending you and agree on this house? Because we kind of felt that it was Guruji's indication. The house didn't go in a month's time. Houses go very quickly in that sort of a location, and the house was still there. When I looked for it for the second time, and it was still there, and it felt like it was Guruji's hint, take this house. So we just told him, we don't want you to look at it, as in don't want you to judge it for us. Just take it, just sign the lease. So he did that for us, a bit unwillingly, because we hadn't looked at the house, hadn't even seen photos. He hadn't sent across any photos to us or anything like that, and yet we were insisting on him signing the lease for us. So he did that, and that house was excellent in all aspects. It's probably one of the best houses that we have stayed at during our last so many years in the UK. It was good from all possible respects, and it was 2.5 minutes drive from Queen's Medical Hospital, which was very relevant at the time because we had to go many times on usual consultations, on checkups and things. And it was all very convenient. And apart from the fact that it had one of the best best maternity units in the country. So so Guruji basically planned everything for us. We just had to take the decision at the right time, but he would actually guide us to through those decisions. And it's not like we had 5 options and we had to think hard to take one. He would give us, he would mark the option that we should take very clearly, so that we didn't have to do much thinking on our side. Yeah, there were a few complications during childbirth, and some of them pretty scary. Immediately after childbirth, my wife, she had a urine infection, and she was 105 degrees. My son had an infection which they couldn't decide whether it was picked up from the mother's bloodstream or it was his own infection. So they put him on strong antibiotics to try to take his spinal fluid to test, but they couldn't. So at one point, both my wife and my son were in ICUs, or they call it ITUs, I think. And I was all alone. The project had ended. All my colleagues had left. So basically, I was all alone in a strange country with no relatives or family, and with no friends, in fact, because everybody had left at that point. But I didn't need anyone really, because I had Guruji's blessing. So he saw through all that tough time. So my wife recovered. My son got better. But there was still a problem that he wasn't passing any urine. So they were starting to doubt his kidneys, but they wanted to give it a few days just before they went in with a camera to see what was happening. And again, so they gave us a deadline. So by this time, if he's not passing any urine, then we'll have to, doubt his kidneys and take further action. And I think one of these days, within the deadline, just before the deadline was over, they put him on a water bed to keep the temperature down, and he passed a bit of urine, and that's how that test was also passed. So they didn't have to do anything further. And now the challenge was, the next challenge that Guruji set up for us was, so as I said, everyone was gone. I was there. I got 1 month's salary without having to go to office, because there was no office at that point. And I was thinking, how would I travel back to India with a child, even before he's a month old, because that can seriously harm the child's eardrums, and I didn't want to risk that. So I was desperately looking for another assignment, even if it's for a few months, so that I could stay back for a few months and then go back to India once his eardrums were strong enough to withstand the flight. And then suddenly I got this assignment at the BBC, but it came with a hard deadline. It said that in 2 weeks, if I could join them for a training that would follow for another 2 weeks, that's the only way I could get this assignment, because the training, there would be people from Israel coming to the UK to impart the training. And if I didn't do the training, then it was as good as turning down the assignment, which of course I didn't want to. So with the 20-day-old child who spent the first 14 days of his life at the hospital, and my wife also, spent 14 days or 13, 14 days in the hospital after giving birth. They would just get about a week's preparation time before we took the trip from Nottingham to London. And obviously, we didn't have a place to stay in London, so we were left with no options. We did that. It was inconvenient at the time because with a 20-day-old child in a hotel for 2 weeks, we had to buy food from outside for ourselves. Just no provision to cook or anything. It was inconvenient, but Guruji saw us through that. We didn't have any problems. It just needed a bit of courage, but Guruji gave us that courage, put us through it. So that assignment in London, that went pretty well for the next few years. And there was a time when Siemens UK wanted me to stay back and cut off my ties with Siemens India and stay back as a UK employee. So that was settled between the two countries, the same company, but in two different countries. Of course, it had a different name back in the day. In the UK, it was called Siemens Business Services. So Siemens Business Services arrived at the settlement on my behalf with Siemens Information Systems Limited, India, so that I could move across as a host-based employee, as in a local employee at the Siemens UK. And that's where I didn't need any visa or any work permit to be extended by by India. So the UK office took charge of everything, and it seemed very likely that I was going to get my permanent residency before I had to go back to India, which of course didn't happen, because then once I got my permanent residency, I changed jobs. I did want to stay back in the UK for the first 5 years, just before my child went to school. But he was born with serious allergies. So even though he was healthy, he was allergic to a great number of food ingredients, like dairy, any form of dairy, soya, which usually is a good alternative to dairy, but wasn't in this case because he was allergic to soya as well. All types of nuts, seafood, and so on. So it was really, really difficult for us, particularly the first time when we realized that he was allergic. It could have been a life-threatening situation. In fact, it was a life-threatening situation, and Guruji saw us through it. So when he was weaning, my wife gave him yogurt, and he reacted immediately. He didn't want to have it, but she thought, it's natural that someone would resist a new food. So she fed her quite a bit of it, and he grew all red and swollen. She called the ambulance, which the service used to be good back at that time, but there were often cases where people had to wait for quite a bit. But even before my wife was off the phone, talking to the emergency services, they knocked on the door. My wife had, she was a bit distraught. She didn't know how things could get bad so drastically. The child who was, 15 minutes back, he was healthy and everything, and suddenly now he was so poorly. She was a bit distraught. She couldn't even open the door. But they let themselves in, using master keys or whatever, and they took them both to the hospital. And that's when we realized that he had this what we called anaphylaxis. It's not just allergies, but allergies which tend to get bad very quickly, choke people's airways, and induce heart attacks and so on. So it was scary, but then again, as I said, with Guruji's blessings, we made it through that episode. And then there were a few other episodes, from time to time, because we were still finding out what he was allergic to and what he wasn't. But there were lots of people. It was very inconvenient. For the first 5 years of his life, we were thinking the moment he gets better, we're going to go back to India for his education. But so the final test that he had when he was 5 years old, we prayed hard to Guruji to cure him, so that if the tests were negative, then we would go back and he would start his education back in India, just like we had. At the time, I didn't trust the education system in the UK a lot, but all that was probably a bit of a misconception. But Guruji, obviously, he knew better. So his test results when he was 5, that actually gone worse. So his allergies had gone worse. So that's when we decided, can't go back to India, had to stay back, and he had to start his education back in the UK. And but looking back, all that has been it has been really good for him. So our misconceptions about education system in this country, they were dispelled. So we probably had a biased view of things, and he has done pretty well so far. not just academically, but he had this flair for music. He plays 4 musical instruments. He was fortunate to go into a private school with Guruji's blessings, where all these things were encouraged a lot, not just the academic subjects, but also extracurricular ones. And again, he was able to do that. Private education is very expensive in this country, and it's often it's well beyond the reach of people who have just come into this country as first generation people. So trying to build a living from scratch without any sort of ancestral property or anything like that. So it's often quite difficult. But luckily, my son did well in his entrance tests. He got quite a bit of scholarships, both academic and music, which made it possible for him to go for private education. So made it possible for us to send him to private school. And that has clearly been quite significant. He also made it to all the grammar schools, which are where he had to go through screening tests. But those schools are government schools where you don't have to pay anything. They're very competitive, and they're very good as well. But in private schools, you not only have to take tests, but you also have to take interviews, and they look at people from overall, from a rounded point of view rather than just focusing on studies. And that has been quite beneficial, I would say. Again, wouldn't have been possible without Guruji's blessings. So for someone who was planning to take his child to India, to stay back in the UK in the first place, and get through all the grammar school exams as well as the private school ones, and then get eventually selected into a private school with that kind of scholarship. Obviously, it's got Guruji's blessings written all over it. Yeah, so that's covers most of what I had in the life, in the light of divinity. But since then, things have moved on. So with my son's allergies, so they were a bit of a pain until he was about 10 years old. And throughout all these 10 years, my wife had to cook for him every time he was going out anywhere, or we were flying back to India on vacation. So she had to cook food for him to take into the plane, train, or whatever. And all of us advised us to take some alternative, use some alternative means of treatment, faith healing and things like that. But we stood our ground and said, no, when Guruji is going to fix him when he needs fixing. So until then, we're not going to do anything. But people kept on pressing, and until one day Guruji came in my wife's dream and said, "Don't do anything. I'll heal him when time is right." And since then, we didn't even think about doing anything, because clearly, So one thing I had known was you can't really dream about Guruji unless he wants to come in your dream. And since he had proactively come in my wife's dream and told her what to do, so we thought, why should we bother? So we just kept on doing what the doctors here ask us to do. Basically, for allergy, they don't ask you to do anything. They just ask you to keep him away from food that's going to give him allergy. And they would just test him from time to time. So no proactive treatment as such. And we went with that because we were counting on Guruji. And when he was 10, some of his allergies were gone. Like the milk one was gone, the soya one was gone. I think some of the nuts ones still remained. And now he's got some of the nut ones are gone as well. Some of the seafood ones still remain. But these days, it's a lot easier for us because the dairy is gone. And some of the nuts ones are gone. So we can go into Indian restaurants a bit more freely, although we have to take our precaution. He still has to carry an EpiPen, which is like an adrenaline injection, just in case. But the ones that he's still allergic to are things we can live without, although there are a few nuts which we have to avoid, Indian cashews and pistachios and stuff. Those are still serious. We have to avoid them. But other than that, I think it's a lot easier. And Guruji has been true to his word. So he asked us not to do anything. We didn't do anything. He has decided the allergies that he is going to fix, and he has fixed them. He has left a few of them. I'm pretty sure that if they need fixing, then he'll fix them. Or if they're just going to be there without doing any harm, then so be it. You know, if that's his, if that's his decision, then we are more than happy to go with that, as we've always done. My wife had a few medical complications as well, and it was so she had kidney stones. We didn't know about that until one of our visits to India. She fell ill. Her illness was not caused by the stones, but then when they tested her, they found the stones. And once they found the stones, they had to do something about it. But we were there only for about 15-20 days. It's difficult to get treated for something like that in 15-20 days, in that kind of time, unless you plan from before. So we tried to find a good consultant, good hospital or clinic. Some of them came across as pretty commercialized, so we didn't trust them. Finally, we found one, and the consultant said, you have to do a procedure where you have to break down the stones into smaller pieces. So the stones that she had were 6 millimeters or something, and we had to break them down into 2 or 3 millimeters so that they can either stay there without causing any harm, or if they pass out with the urine. But a 6 millimeter stone couldn't pass with the urine. You had to break it down. And he wanted to do a procedure for that, but he also said that that's going to take time. So why don't you go back to the UK and tell them about my findings, and they'll do that process of breaking down the stone into smaller pieces. My child was very small then, and we were thinking if Guruji can let us out of this situation, if we didn't have to do that, because once we're back in the UK, then again we are all alone. It's difficult to find people that would look after things for you when you are busy at the hospital. So we told, but nonetheless, we came back to the UK and we told the doctors about the findings of the consultant in India and said that we needed that procedure, lithotripsy, if that could be arranged. And here in the NHS, they don't trust any results from outside. They said, oh, we're going to do the test again. So they did the ultrasound and came back and told us, so what did you want to do again? I said, break down the stones into smaller pieces. And they said, how big do you think the stone is? I said, 6 millimeters. I said, no, there are a couple of stones. There are 2-3 stones, but they're about 2-3 millimeters each. So we were surprised because we still had those pictures from India, those reports saying 6 millimeter stone. And we wanted to break it down into 2 to 3 millimeter stones. And now suddenly something had happened that the stones were broken down into smaller pieces so that we didn't have to do that procedure anymore. Obviously, who would have done it apart from Guruji? So the procedure that we would have done happened automatically. The effects of that were produced automatically by I think his blessings granted that. So we didn't have to do the physical procedure and go through that pain or inconvenience of all that. So he did it the way he wanted, and he did it precisely at the right time, so that by the time the doctors here tested that, they found that the stones had already been broken down. So they didn't have to do it. And so I'm just looking at if I'm missing something out. Yeah, then my wife had the heart rate. She had problems with her heart rate. She would so she went to the doctor to sort of for some other symptoms, and so they put her through put a monitor on her to monitor her heart rate and how it kept throughout the day, and they found that they were sort of trying to treat her for palpitations, but what they found instead was the palpitations were all right. There was an explanation. for why sort of at times her heart went faster. It's not a that wasn't such a huge problem. It happened to many people, and that can be treated obviously. But what they didn't expect to see, but saw, was towards the morning, very early morning, in her sleep, her heart rate reduced to dangerously low levels. So if there is a pause that's 3 seconds or more, then you have to put the patient on a pacemaker. They didn't want to do that because she was relatively young. So at that age, you don't want someone to be on a be on a pacemaker. But protocol sort of demanded that they would have to do that if it reached 3 seconds. If the pauses towards early morning when she used to have the pauses, if they reached 3 seconds. So this doctor, he said, I'm going to try and see, they were not quite at 3 seconds at the time, but he said that could reach 3 seconds because it was dangerously close, 2.8, 2.9. And at the moment it hit 3, then he'd have to do that. So then after that, he kept on putting my wife for 3-day monitors, I think 3 days, 4 days, 7 days. So it was a long and painful process because he wouldn't let go, just in case. He didn't want to put her on pacemaker, given her age, but he didn't want to risk anything either in case something happened. So before he drew his conclusions, he put my wife through on the monitor for 3-4 times, and varying periods of time. As I said, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. I think one was 7 days. And in all the readings that they had, she had gone close to 3, like 2.8, but she hadn't quite hit 3. So they said that then this is probably something genetic. It's nothing caused by any condition that needs treating. And so long as it's less than 3 seconds, we can let you go. So they kept her on the clinic for about 2.5 years, but didn't quite have to put her on the pacemaker again, which would have been again something that people don't want to do at that age. And also it comes with restrictions. There's things you can do or you can't do when you have a pacemaker on. But Guruji spared us that. So that's the way it has been. It's very often in life he has looked after us, and so that if there have been situations where we wouldn't have known what to do, but she would guide us at times. He used to say, "Ghisega nahi to sona kaise banega." So he has made sure that we go through what we have to go through, and in the end, he has rescued us from situations which could have gone, which could have been much more serious. So yeah, so I mean, over the last how many years? So the first time we went to him was 2001, and it's coming to now. It's 23 years. Out of that time, we have really been physically. We've been close to him, visiting the Empire State twice every week, for about 1.5 to 2 years, because I had a few UK trips, and then I spent some time in India, and then came back to the UK almost permanently. So I would say not even 2 years. We've physically probably we have seen him quite a few times, because we used to go every week twice when we were in Delhi. But the fact that we hadn't been in Delhi most of the time, it was, when I say Delhi, I mean Delhi or Gurgaon, but it would be 1.5 years end to end that we regularly visited him. The rest of the time, we've prayed to him from 5,000 miles across the oceans. But he has always guided us through tough situations in life, helped us take the right decisions, often given us things that we were not expecting. And obviously, it hasn't been smooth sailing all the time. But when faced with a situation which looks scary and adverse, we kind of know somewhere that he's going to bail us out in the end, which he has. So thank him for that. Thank you for all his blessings. And above all, thank him for the fact that there's so many people, as in at the time when I was in Kolkata trying for a US assignment, just as everyone used to do back in the day. I had quite a few of them not working until I found the one in Delhi that was sort of, and they were sending me to the UK. If any of my first attempts would have been successful, then I would have probably flown from Calcutta to US and never met Guruji. So, and I think that if that had happened, then the fact that if that had happened and I wouldn't have known Guruji, that's what seems scary now. And so lucky that things worked out the way it did. And our paths crossed Guruji's. Well, I say that, but the thing is, if he hadn't wanted it to, then it wouldn't have. So yeah, ever thankful to Guruji for everything, and very thankful to Watson Uncle Ji for allowing me to again share my satsangs with everyone. And that's it from me. If anyone has any questions, then I'm happy to answer, or I'll just hand over to Shweta Aunty, and she can take it from here.
I'll be requesting host to make Rupa Sud Aunty co-host, please. Bhattacharya uncle, please make Rupa Sud Aunty co-host. I think maybe she's not able to continue. Thanks a lot, Pushpal uncle.
No problem. It's all my pleasure. Thank you, Vasan Uncle Ji.
It was a blissful, divine journey shared by you. And as usual, for the last 4 years, you have been sharing Sangat.
No problem.
Thanks a lot. It was Guruji's meher, Guruji's kirpa, his blessings.
Of course, yeah. I'm sorry, my Hindi is, again, this has happened earlier in Amitabh Uncle's sessions as well. My Hindi is not good. It's all right, but if I did it in Hindi, it's difficult to get flow. So I've tried a couple of times. So that's why I continued in English.
That's okay. It's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
In the meanwhile, I'll be informing Sangat, the participants, that one content in English, the name Prostration Guruji was translated by Pushpal uncle in Bangla language before 3 years. So, hats off for you, uncle. The same content has been uploaded in our website, and any Bangla community Sangat may, if interested, they may read that. You may just refer. Thanks a lot. And I'll be requesting host to please organize Agya from Guruji. Sorry, we will not take the Agya today. Today, since we have the reading session, so please you may just put up the recording.